Today's headline is Origin of Political Slang. The subheadline says, Copperheads, nephews of his uncle, Carpetbaggers, and others. It says, Major Ben C. Truman, who was private secretary to President Johnson during the latter's occupancy of the White House, was afforded many opportunities for observation of political doings in those stirring times, and thus speaks with authority on the origin of many expressions still in use in current political life. Major Truman declares that while many of the slang expressions used in the United States are called Americanisms, most of the latter have been bequeathed us from early English literature and a way down that line from Shakespeare to Dickens, and some of our most common applications have been adapted from the Bible itself. But an exception may be made regarding our political slang, nearly all of which is strictly original, and few or none of our presidential campaigns have been carried through without the production of some new political slang term of more or less effectiveness. Indeed, to go back only a few presidential terms, no future treasure house of American English words will be complete without the mugwump of 1884. It seemed expressionless and far-fetched as first applied by someone never strictly traceable to those Republican goody-goodies who broke away from Blaine and helped elect Cleveland, and no satisfactory conclusion was ever arrived at concerning its prosody or etymology. In 1834, the nickname of Locofocos was given to the adherents of the Democratic Party throughout the United States, who followed the course of a majority of the members of Tammany Hall, who, when the lights were turned out on them during a tumultuous meeting, kept right on with their proceedings by flickerings from Locofoco matches until candles were procured. About the same time, the members of the more radical wing of the New York democracy received the derisive name of barn burners, classing them with a lot of lawless incendiaries, who for many months vented their spite on the owners of large grain and corn lands in the Mohawk and Oswego valleys by burning their barns. Along in the 40s came the terms abolitionists and free soilers, as applied to the growing anti-slavery element in the North, and about the same time, the nickname of dough-faces, as applied to pro-slavery men of both parties in the North, and that of fire-eaters, applicable to extreme pro-slavery orators and newspaper editors of the South. Regarding the term dough-faces, there has always been some difference of opinion as to its orthography and meaning, but Honorable George Bradburn once said in a political speech that John Randolph, in referring to these northern demagogues from his seat in Congress, branded them as dough-faces. Randolph spelled the word D-O-E face, in allusion to the timid, startled look of that animal, which is said to shrink from the reflection of its own face in the water. During the Civil War, the pro-slavery Democrats and other rebel sympathizers in the North were termed Copperheads, after one of the meanest and most venomous of snakes. It was Mr. Lincoln who said that not all Democrats were Copperheads, but all Copperheads were Democrats. Immediately after the war, those Republicans who went south and were elected to office were called Carpetbaggers, and all natives who affiliated with Republicans were derided by the Southern people generally as Scalawags. Probably more political slang grew out of the campaign of 1870 than of all the others that preceded it, and the borrow of money, bulldozing, visiting statesmen, solid South, stalwarts, shotgun policy, 19 rebel brigaders, counting out, returning boards, nephew of his uncle, and some others belong to that momentous year. A few years afterward, Congressman Flanagan of Texas contributed to our political Americanisms, "What are we here for?" And Cobb of Georgia asked, "Where am I at?" But Senator Quay of Pennsylvania added a phrase to political literature that will reach a good old age when he wrote to a friend, "You do your part, and I will shake the plum tree." It was in 1876 that we first heard of the dark horse, Mr. Hayes having been trotted out as the equine individual. There have been many attempts to hunt up the pedigree of the dark horse in politics, and the following has been generally the most satisfying. A few years before the war, there lived in Tennessee a trading jockey who had a coal-black stallion, almost a thoroughbred. He entered this horse in a country race meeting where he was not known and where the natives heavily backed 2 or 3 favorites against him. Old Judge McMenemy, the turf oracle of that part of the state, was one of the judges of the meeting, and when he was told how the stranger was foolishly betting on his horse, he looked at the stallion and said, "Gentlemen, there's a dark horse in this race that will make some of you suffer before supper." That imaginary stream called Salt River, up which defeated candidates are supposed to be rowed, is one of the most felicitous of all our political Americanisms, although its authorship is unknown. The term caucus was first used in 1828. Elbridge Gerry, a Democratic Massachusetts politician of the latter part of the 18th and the early part of the 19th century, was accused of having instigated the first division of states into congressional districts without regard to the natural order and conditions, in order that his party might succeed, thus gerrymander. Probably the greatest excitement, next to the Civil War, our country has ever known, was that in 1855 to 1857, between the abolitionists of the North and the slaveholders of the South, for the possession of Kansas, then opening to the advance of immigration, and out of which the terms bleeding Kansas, border ruffians, and squatter sovereignty are undoubtedly defined in all text and phrase books. The word boss was first applied by Henry J. Raymond in the New York Times in 1856 to Isaiah Reinders, who was at the head of the Democratic marching clubs of that year. The word is derived from the Dutch settlers who first colonized New Amsterdam. Boss in the Dutch language signifies a master or the foreman of a workshop. Regarding the word machine, as derisively applied to politics in various parts of the United States during the past 50 years, it has been generally believed that it originated in New York, where up to 1860, the fire engines were called machines, the firemen were volunteers, and all of them politicians of some degree. But the application was borrowed from the English, for as long ago as 1845, the Duke of Wellington wrote to a friend as follows: "Such as the operation of the machine is now established, that no individual can have any personal influence." The word voter, too, as applied to the purchasable voter, is filched from the English. The terms jingo and jingoism were voluminously applied to Secretary Blaine and to President Cleveland, and to their brilliant and patriotic attitudes as Americans by foreign newspapers in their attempt to show that the Americans were spoiling for a fight. The words evidently come from the Amazonian Empress of China named Jingo, who made a furious oral onslaught on Korea in 204 AD. This article originally came from the Kansas City Star. This story came from the great state of South Carolina, being reported in the Yorkville Enquirer of November 22nd, 1910. Thank you for joining us today. If you want to continue to uncover all of America's lost and forgotten history, now remember before you leave to hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and remember to like and comment below. And we will see you next time on Americana Archives.